Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Truth Will Set You Free show. This show is brought to you by TLBTV and the Liberty Beacon Project. I'm your host, Linda Diane Wattley, and you know me and how I feel about my guests. I actually have one guest sitting here, but this is dedicated to two guests because they are just one in so many ways. I have Tim and Debbie. Tim is going to carry the ride today. How you doing, Tim?
I'm doing great. How are you doing, Linda?
I want people to know that I am so fascinated with you two because the way y'all came together fascinates me from the standpoint that before you two met, both of y'all were content with what y'all was doing in your lives prior to meeting. It's like,
that's right.
I mean, y'all was using your time, letting God do what he wanted to do with you. And then the day came that he wanted you to have a wife.
And it's been pretty exciting ever since.
Yes. And this is such an interesting thing, though, because the way y'all met, I don't really want to say a whole lot, but I want you to tell people about you and your wife before y'all got married.
Okay. I was living in Maine for most of my life, actually. And in my 40s, I was in a corporate job setting and lonely. I've been praying for a wife for many years. Nothing seemed to work out, so I went online, and users beware. I was trying to find a mate online, but I found Debbie out there, and we kind of developed a friendship. It was about 2003, and just as an email pen pal, because we lived 5 hours apart by car. And so we just kind of touched base maybe once a year for 3 or 4 of those years. Debbie was involved in some more serious relationships where she lived. And when we turned age 50 in 2007, we celebrated our 50th birthdays together. We're only 15 days apart. And so I went down to Massachusetts where Debbie lived. And then from that time on, our friendship kind of grew more in terms of the time we spent together and kind of our interest level in one another. Those changes were happening as, for me at least, while I was going through a transition at work. I was in a long-term job in a corporation, ended up working there 26 years, and kind of there was a convergence of events as Debbie and I got closer. Things were happening inside the organization that suggested God had something for me elsewhere. And long story short, on my end, is I gave them notice to essentially retire from that company, although at age 52, it really wasn't retirement for me. And simultaneous with that, right before they had a luncheon in my honor, night before actually, I proposed to Debbie on top of Cadillac Mountain in Acadia National Park. On Debbie's side of things, she's a school teacher, and she was very involved as a literacy specialist for a K-8 school. And, life was cruising along for her. And so, we kind of ended up coming together. And so at age 52, we ended up tying the knot. And I relocated from Maine to Massachusetts, but only after we had taken a long distance bicycle ride for our honeymoon. And that ride started in Seaside, Oregon, and ended in Cape Elizabeth, Maine, 3,500 miles later.
Wow. I mean, I find it fascinating how both of y'all was on the same page about, getting on 2 bikes and traveling across the country.
Yes, it's funny how that all came about because Debbie is very much an adventuresome spirit, probably more so than I am. And well, I shouldn't say probably, I would say definitely. And just shortly after proposing to her, I said, you know, this was in April. I says, I don't have anything lined up. I don't really know what I'm going to do with the rest of my life vocationally. What do you think about bicycling across America after we get married? And she was all over that. There was no
Wow.
being a school teacher, she had summers off. So we began a process. That was April 22nd was when I proposed. We married on June 19, and we began cycling from Oregon on July 3rd. So we basically had to plan a wedding and a long distance bicycle tour from scratch in the space of a few weeks, basically.
That's just so fascinating to me. So, how did authorship come into your marriage? Was one of you authors already, or did y'all come to that together also?
Well, we kind of did come to that together, although as I left corporate America, I was a finance guy. And one of the things I had an interest in pursuing was writing. So after our bicycle tour, Debbie went back to her teaching position full time that September. And then the following winter, I developed a blood clot in one of my legs. And you know, it was really, we let it go too far before we even realized what was happening. Consequence of that was I was on my back for probably 5 to 6 weeks, letting that blood clot clear. And all I could do all day long was look at a picture frame of the photos that we took on our bicycle tour. I sat there with a netbook computer, and the obvious thing was I had to start recording what happened on our tour. That was really God's prompting for me to begin writing. And we had a lot of content that we had developed as we were riding because we journaled along the way. And so Debbie, in our first book, Two or Better, shared snippets in and around the narrative that I developed as I was sitting on that love seat on my back with a blood clot for several weeks. So when we came to our second big project, Wheels of Wisdom, we liked our first bicycle tour so much that we ended up going on now actually 4 others. And by the time Wheels of Wisdom was written, 2 other tours. And on our third tour, it was called the Hope Line Tour. And Debbie and I had both been volunteer hope coaches for the Hope Line, which is an internet chat service for young people who are struggling with life issues. And when we went on that tour, we were trying to raise money for that organization and at the same time bring awareness to both our following and anybody else who we could get to follow us on our bicycle tour as to what they did and why it was a worthy cause. So that particular tour was really bathed in a lot of prayer. People were praying for us, and it was just God. There were so many God moments in it. And we were blogging every day, you know, as a function of basically engaging the audience and pitching the ministry. So when we got back from that tour, it was just so obvious. We had so many compelling moments from the road that taught a life lesson or, you know, some sort of spiritual principle that we had been derelict not to share this with the world. So we took a lot of content from that tour, plus our first 2 tours, and assembled 52 life lessons for the Restless Spirit in Wheels of Wisdom.
That is an amazing book, and it's also pleasant, and it's also soul searching too. But you was talking about, you know, that foundation that you volunteer for. While y'all was on y'all tour, riding y'all bikes, y'all had experience that confirmed that God was ordained in this because someone's son was threatening suicide, right?
Yes, that would be in Xenia, Ohio, at a restaurant that we went to. And the waitress came over to our booth, and as was our habit, we had cards in hand ready to hand out to people and tell them about the cause. And when we did that to her, she basically stopped immediately and said, "This is a God moment." And she
Wow.
sat right down beside Debbie kind of leaned into her and we just started chatting. Her son had been struggling with suicidal thoughts. And, we basically were able to encourage her, give her some information to share with the son, and, pray for her at different times throughout the rest of that trip. So, that's just one example of these
Just
different.
one, yeah.
Yeah.
And I tell you, another one was, remember that one guy, he was riding across the country all by himself? That really had effect on you.
You must be talking about our ride through Hell's Canyon, appropriately named. Yes, we met a fellow on a recumbent bicycle. He had come from Los Angeles. This was up in the high desert in Oregon at this point. We started that tour in Oregon, and we came into a town, Richland, Oregon, on the Oregon Trail, just short of the Snake River as you go toward the Idaho border. You go down into this canyon called Hell's Canyon. Well, this fellow came into this restaurant, and he was just livid about the people that had bothered him at the campsite the night before. And they were apparently, I don't know if they were Amish or Mennonite, but they were sharing apparently the gospel with him. He kept making references to they were trying to convert him. And he was just kind of really berating Christianity. And, we were kind of sitting there looking at one another, this is an interesting encounter. And at some point, I just let him go on. And finally, when he paused, I felt like I had to say something. I said, gee, what if what they're telling you is true? What if the Bible is true? Well, he basically said, well, then I'm going to hell. And he laughed mockingly. And it was just really kind of sad. And so we ended up leaving and, paying our bill and going outside and just kind of looking at one another and what happened to him to make him so bitter, basically. So another day went by. We went down into Hell's Canyon and stayed the night and got a late start the next morning, much to the chagrin of our neighbor, who said, you better get out of this canyon early, because he knew how hot it got. And we didn't get out very early. We were 56 years old, sleeping in a tent, not very fast when it comes to getting out of camp in the morning. And we cycled along the Snake River, and we met a fellow, or actually a couple, coming in the other direction. They were just about done. They only had one state left in their Trans-America tour. Naturally, we stopped and engaged with them. And that slowed us up a little more. So we finally got across the Snake River into Idaho and began climbing out of the canyon. And boy, was it hot. We were just sweating profusely and kind of just crawling up the steep canyon. And finally, Debbie's got this thermometer tied onto her whistle she carries on her handlebar bag. She looks down at that, it's 100 degrees. So we keep going, and we found this little convenience store with like a lunch counter, just kind of in the middle of nowhere, halfway up this climb. So we decided we'd go in and see what, if they had air conditioning, and thankfully they did. And so we went in there and got our bottles replenished with water and got something to eat and drink. So we're sitting down waiting for our order. And in walks this guy who's climbing out of that canyon that we'd met the day before. He's on a recumbent bicycle, which they're much heavier bicycles to climb up a hill like that. You just couldn't imagine what he must have been dealing with. Well, when we saw him come in, he just kind of looked at us and glanced the other way. It was obvious that he didn't want us to engage him in any way. But when we left that, the rest of the climb out of that canyon, basically I ended up getting cramps. I'd say it was probably verge of heat stroke if it had continued much longer.
Oh.
And it made us really think about this guy and what would happen to him as he cycled across America with, you know, dogs chasing him at eye level on his recumbent bicycle, bears in a campground, tractor trailers whizzing by. It pays to know where you're going when you die.
You know, talking about a tractor trailer, that one that switched past your wife, that was phenomenal how she survived.
Yeah, that was also in Oregon. That was actually on our first tour, probably our 4th or 5th day of touring. So we were very much novices. Debbie and I had never toured by bicycle before. We were recreational cyclists. You know, we might have done rides on a weekend of 20 to 30 miles on average. Each of us had, you know, bicycled 100 miles in a day before for different nonprofit events. But generally speaking, we're recreational cyclists, so we knew nothing about carrying a big load on our bicycles and also bicycling 60 or 70 miles a day. So here we are in Oregon. And the bicycle path takes us from kind of these secondary low-traveled roads right out onto the interstate. Now, you can't cycle on the interstate in a lot of states in America, but in Oregon you can. And in this particular place, you pretty much had to get from point A to point B. So there we were out on the interstate, and there's a slow-moving vehicle on the shoulders, kind of a service vehicle. And I'm cycling behind Debbie, and she's kind of just meandering along and pulling out to go around this service vehicle. Pretty wide shoulder there. But there's a rumble strip right beside the travel lane. And unbeknownst to her, I'm looking behind me in my rearview mirror as a tractor trailer coming. She hit that rumble strip, and her fork on her bike, you know, the front tire, swiveled because she kind of lost grip on it. And I'm looking at that, just thinking, oh my gosh, this is a catastrophe. And I don't know how Debbie did it. You know, she only weighs 120 pounds and she's carrying, I don't know, 80 pounds. And she just, somehow, she grabbed that fork and she was able to propel the bicycle out of the rumble strip. But there were pretty deep ruts in that rumble strip, and she was hardly moving at that point. So it was really a remarkable physical feat. And when that tractor trailer whizzed by at, you know, probably 70, 80 miles an hour, when that left, we had, you know, our hearts were pounding, and it was a real wake-up call as to the hazards of the road.
But it's also added to some bonding, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And it gave, I'm sorry, it also really gave us a sense of God's protection, because normally when you look at what happened, she shouldn't have been able to do what she did. So we kind of filed that away, got Debbie a rear view mirror, and kept going.
Wow. And remember when she lost that one part to her tire? Now that was heaven sent too, when she was able to find it, remember?
Yeah, that was actually her bite valve from her Camelback. So a Camelback is a device that you wear on your back. There's a bladder that has water in it, 70 ounces, and a tube that comes out of the bladder. So you're carrying your water supply on your back, and the tube comes up to your mouth. It's got a bite valve on it. So we're out on the High Line in Montana, and it's on eastern Montana here, very, very sparsely populated and hot. It was 90 degrees, real arid, dry heat. And so Debbie's cycling along, and she somehow pulled the bite valve off, and when the hose went off the bite valve, it kind of all went out of her mouth, but the valve fell off the hose. And the wind was blowing and took the bite valve and blew it into the brush. So meanwhile, the tube flops down and water's coming out. There's nothing to stop the water. Well, she needs that water to get to the next place. So she's holding the tube upright, and we start hunting for the bite valve. So, we're hunting there probably a half hour, couldn't find it. Combed the whole area we thought it would land in. So we said, well, I can't even remember how we rigged up the hose so it wouldn't leak, but we basically said we're going to have to figure out something else. So let's make sure the water doesn't leak. So when we started to go, I can't remember which one of us, but we looked over in this tuft of grass, and there was the bite valve.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. It's like, wow, that was such a spiritual journey. Okay, here's two people who met in their 50s online, who had fulfilled lives. They just didn't have companionship. So when these two people get on the road, what was the first challenge of whether you was going to make it or not with each other?
Well, we had many questions. We had many questions of whether, basically, we didn't know that we were going to go across America. We were going on a honeymoon, and we bought enough, we bought new touring bicycles and enough gear that would take us as far as we could go. So we were equipped to do all the way across the country, but we thought, well, maybe we can do 2 weeks and then we'll fly back, or maybe a month. And Debbie had a deadline. She had to go back to school in September. So, we only had 2 months. And also, as you imply, your question implies, we were single all our lives. We both lived alone. And here we are 24/7 together all the time. And sometimes there's a little bit like cats and dogs. And we had a real encounter, a headbutting, I guess would be a better word for it, in Oregon. It was probably a couple days after that incident on I-84 that I just described, where we got a flat tire coming into camp the night before. And I fixed the flat, or so I thought. And the next morning, the tire was flat again. The air had seeped right out of it. I only had 2 spare tubes, which that was also a lesson in and of itself, because I'm like, well, 2 tubes, that should be plenty. But I have no idea where the next bike shop is. It could be 2 weeks ahead, and we might end up with more flat tires. So I thought, I better try patching that tire, because I don't want to use both of those, or either one of those tubes at this point. So there we are. Temperatures going higher, it's getting into the morning. Neither one of us are real mechanical. And I'm trying to patch this tire, and it's just not working. And finally, Debbie's putting the pressure on, just put a tube in it, just put a tube in it. So finally, I had to pretty much listen to my wife, because it wasn't working to patch it anyway. I didn't know what I was doing. So I replaced the tube. We rolled out of there at 1:30 in the afternoon, and it was 95 degrees, 92 degrees, something like that. And so we're back up onto the high desert, headwind in our face. It was a challenging day. And at the end of that short ride, we found a motel, and we hung out, and we're still kind of simmering, but literally. But it was a good, a necessary. And conflict is what relationships are all about, right? That's how you work through things. You learn to deal with those conflicts. So we were definitely in conflict 101 at that point, because we were really butting heads. But it helped that we established the discipline. luckily we both have life experience and have been Christians for a lot of years, that we wanted to pray and read the Bible each night. So that really helped us to kind of simmer down a little bit, because there's someone else to focus on other than either ourselves or one another. And that's our Lord. And we both share a love for him. So that really, that was very instructional for us, and became a model for future conflict.
And another thing that was kind of challenging too was when she lost her sandal.
Oh, yes.
You learned something about her that day, didn't you?
Debbie, it's only a sandal. We'll get another one.
She was serious about that sandal.
Yeah, we had gotten separated in a construction zone. We both had our heads down because there was only one lane of traffic on a kind of a double highway with a rumble strip right on the shoulder. And we're both concentrating, and unbeknownst to me, I'm kind of focusing on staying out of the rumble strip. And I don't know, 10 minutes later, I look back in my rearview mirror and nobody's there. So wait a minute, where'd she go? So I picked up my cell phone and called her. She's crying on the phone. Debbie, what's wrong? I'm thinking, has a car hit her, and or what? And she's, I lost my sandal, So, and I couldn't really go back. I'd be going back into traffic. So I says, well, is your bike okay? Can you ride your bike? So she said, yeah. So she rode up to where I was, and the bike was fine, so we would be able to go, but she was just heartbroken about her sandals.
So how did she come out of it?
Well, that night, I have to hand it to Debbie. She really faced the truth on this one. She said, one sandal isn't going to do me any good. It's just extra weight on my bicycle, and this is heavy enough as it is. So she took the sandal, went to the waste can in the hotel, and dropped it in.
Aww.
Then we went to Walmart the next day and picked up a cheap pair of flip-flops, and that saw her along the rest of the way.
And see, one of the things that she also learned too, because she said, like when you're in a certain state that's not acceptable to your companion, blow the whistle. Tell us about that thing that she learned.
Yeah.
Blow the whistle.
I have to qualify this story because this was Debbie's idea.
Right.
We're riding along. This is on our third tour in Kentucky. And we had read about dogs in Kentucky. And that's one of the things on bicycle touring blogs and whatnot. You'd read these different things in different areas. They talked about wild dogs in Kentucky. So, we had some dog spray if we got in a pinch. That's hard to use because you got to balance your bicycle, and it's heavy, it's loaded. You have to find the spray to use it. You have to aim it, and you don't really want to use it anyway if you don't have to. So we decided, why don't we carry whistles for when we get in areas where there might be dogs? Well, we didn't know, maybe a whistle would startle them and make them go away. Sometimes we thought maybe it just incited them and made them chase us harder. But at any rate, one day I had my whistle around my neck, and we were going up this hill, and Debbie said something like, I can't remember what she said, but she was, she said something that was a little bit sarcastic. So just for fun, I took the whistle and blew the whistle at the NFL referee, said 15 yards, unnecessary sarcasm. So she kind of chuckled, and that got her to thinking. So we're cycling along in Kentucky. There's nothing other than woods where we are, woods and hills, no cars around, no nothing. So she's just kind of out there thinking. She says, you know, I know I've been complaining a lot lately. I don't like to complain. This is her talking to herself. So she looks at me and she said, you know, if I complain one more time, I want you to blow that whistle on me. So, okay, I'd love to do that.
Wow.
So we went along, and so, you know, Debbie's was probably 5 or 10 minutes later, she's thinking, I wonder if he really paid attention to me. So she complained about something. She did it on purpose. She was testing me. So sure enough, I blew the whistle. Unnecessary complaining, whatever. She said, okay, I just wanted to make sure you were paying attention. So the rest of that day, I'm kind of paying attention to see if she's complaining about anything or anything that might be a hint of a complaint. Of course, I'd take advantage of that, right? Nothing. And we got to the end of the day, and it was getting dark, and this lady saw us in a convenience store. We didn't have any place to stay. She knew of a place that had just closed, but she knew the proprietor. She called him up, ended up booking a room for us. I mean, it was like everything was falling into place. And so Debbie got done at the end of the day, and she thought, wow, just to have Tim hold me accountable, to blow that whistle if he hears me complaining, stop my complaining. There's a lesson in that. If we have any issues in our lives that we want to have victory over, we can ask an accountability partner to hold us accountable when they see us doing something that we asked them to call us out on when they saw it. So that was kind of that lesson.
It was so many lessons. I also like that saying, if I put myself last, my marriage would last.
Yes, that was another Debbieism.
Right. And I said, wow, that was really important.
Yeah, very biblical.
Yes.
Yeah, he who shall be.
If I put myself last, my marriage will last.
Yeah.
I mean, I mean, if you do that, you're going to be married forever. You know?
Yes.
Right. I mean, it's just so many,
As a spouse does that, whether it's the husband or the wife, it certainly makes it easier for the other spouse to honor them and raise them up because they can see, the sacrifices that they're making.
I tell you another thing that I really love about you too is what y'all stand for. I have to share that. I think that's awesome that you two came together. And remember what y'all was writing about, what you stand for? Like God empowers us to dream and accomplish more than we could in our own power.
Yes.
That is profound. I love it.
And it's never too late.
Yes. And I mean, y'all came up with this together? Wow. And then another one was two are better than one in work and in play.
Yes, we're discovering that even after 8 years of marriage. It's been awesome. I mean, we really had the best of both worlds in many respects. Yes, we were very lonely, each of us in our own way, but there's a price to be paid in any kind of lifestyle. If you're single, you're lonely, but you can do things that married people can't do. If you're married, you have a companion, and you have working out the burrs in your personality, if you will, and becoming sanctified as God would use your spouse to do that. But you can't do some of the things that single people can do.
Wow.
So, yeah, and to have had a long single life, but now still marching forward as a married couple and learning what that's all about.
Yeah, I have really made some good points about marriage too. And I think you remember also that one biker, he didn't have his wife or girlfriend or anybody with him, and he was on the road. He stopped you too. And it's like that had effect on how y'all valued your relationship when you realized that you wasn't traveling alone and neither was she.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, here we
Yeah.
are in Iowa, and this guy comes along cycling with a trailer in tow, all by himself.
Yeah.
Well, that was a striking picture, just to see him alone. And he kind of came over to our side of the road, and it was so obvious that he was lonely, that he wanted to talk. But his wife was not a cyclist, and he always wanted to do this. So he was kind of pursuing his dream. But it was good. But it really did, as you point out, it spoke to us about, wow, that might have been me, or
Right.
might have been Debbie. And boy, we're so thankful we get to do this together. We probably never would have done this, either one of us separately. So good for him, though, for doing it.
But he went on, but it also made y'all realize how valuable two was.
Absolutely. The
I was
fear factor, when like we were kind of naive on our first trip. We're staying out one night in Idaho. We basically had to find our own campsite because we ran out of daylight. And later we realized, we were camping. Wild animals are. And we didn't make any provision to take our food and separate it from us in the tent. Now, we didn't have it in the tent, but we had it pretty close. And just some things we hadn't really thought about that we learned later. And but you don't, for some reason, when there's two of you together, those fears like of the night or fears of the road just don't seem to be that big.
I'll tell you another thing that's really beautiful about both of you, Debbie and you, is that you're really opposites, but yet there's so many similarities that just makes it almost like perfect. Because like you said, she's like, wow, and you kind of laid back a little bit. You just let her do her thing. You be like, I'll be here when you come back, but yet y'all go together to.
That's right.
Lives.
We're puzzle pieces as God would have it. And if we were the same, we wouldn't
exactly
connect. We'd be competing, not cooperating.
Right.
And we've learned that, it takes a while to learn that, that we're complementary. And so it's okay that we're different. That causes maybe us to react in different ways to one another, but that's good as part of growth. So absolutely, I think it's by God's design that we're different.
So do you think that y'all would have gotten to know each other in the capacity that y'all did riding bicycles across the country, in contrast to just, okay, we move into this house together, let's find out who we are? Do you think that kind of advanced it, you getting on bikes going across the country, or do you think you would have still came to that conclusion of who each other are?
That's an interesting question. And there's a couple different facets to it, I think. For one thing, it put us together 24/7. And if I had moved into Debbie's condo, which ends up that's what I did, but if that had happened right when she went back to school, so she's off in her job for 8 hours or more a day, and I'm doing my work at home when she's at work, and then we come together with the stress of each of our work models, and you're kind of adding in regular ordinary life to it and the grind of it. And here we are, we're not spring chickens. We're both 52 years old.
That's fascinating.
And so I think with the bicycle tour, it gave us kind of this celebration and adventure, but at the same time, we were together and we were on a mission, and we had to work together to be able to do what we did, basically. I
Wow.
mean, as after first 15 days, we landed in Great Falls, Montana, and it was really in doubt. Are we going to be able to go farther, or is this it? Because Debbie had a saddle sore that was the monster of all saddle sores, and we had to hole up for a few days. So, but we basically got through that, and at that point determined we can do this. And that really energized us and got us working together. And it also gave us a foundation that, look, we look back on those trips almost every day of our lives. We built memories. We didn't build memories when we were raising kids in our 20s, or, you know, whatever we were doing in our 30s. We started at age 52. So it seems like God supersized our experience and gave us something, just years of memories in a short period of time that we could draw back on and just celebrate together. And it's just awesome.
I know. It's just, I'm just in awe that you was able to do it. I mean, wow. But like your book, Wheels of Wisdom, what do you want people to take away from that book?
Wheels of Wisdom was written to a general audience, actually. It's written from a Christian perspective, but we wanted this book to appeal to anyone who has some interest in faith matters. Maybe they're a new Christian, maybe they're not a Christian at all, but they've got questions. And they can see how God reveals his hand in normal activities of life. In this case, maybe not normal activities of life, but, you know, in bicycle rides and, you know, an adventure like that, and in happenstance. So we hope it appeals to a seeker. We think of it as a seeker's devotional. The book has won awards in Christian nonfiction, Christian devotional, also just a general inspiration category, personal adult ebook. So it's not just for a Christian. It's really written to a general audience from a Christian perspective. It's kind of the same mindset that we take onto the Hope Line when we're interacting with young people who are coming in for help. And they don't know us from Adam, and they will share lots of things about themselves, and we'll always ask permission from them after we've listened to them and encouraged them. Do you mind if I share what God has to say about the issue you're struggling with? If they say yes, we'll gently describe that, maybe share the plan of salvation. And at the end of the chat, we'll ask them if they would like us to pray for them. If they don't want that, we're not going to shove it down their throat. That's not the way it works, and that's not who we are. So in this book, we're really trying to engage a general audience about faith matters from a Christian perspective.
So when y'all put that book together, because it's like both of y'all have, I mean, it's like it's amazing how balanced what she has to bring to the book and what you had to bring to the book. I mean, it's just like a song, the way you just, you know, just knew when to put her quote, when to put your quote. Who was the actual person doing all the keying?
Well, when we were on these trips, we pulled lessons from 3 tours: our honeymoon tour, the Hope Line tour in 2014, and then in 2012, we took a tour from Florida to Maine. So we pulled some lessons from that tour. And so on each of those tours, we were both journaling along the way. So in essence, we're both creating content. And when we put this book together, I went back and pulled in, you know, different ideas from other things that happened. And Debbie took some of those ideas and wrote some more content. And then I took some and wrote some more content. I kind of worked as almost like an editor of our own content for both of us. And then we hired external editors. We had a developmental editor who looked at it and made recommendations, excellent recommendations. Erin Casey's her name. And then we had a copy editor. We took Erin's suggestions and weaved them into the manuscript. And then we sent it to Kevin Miller, who was a copy editor, and he gave us a few go-rounds and had some rework on some things. And then John David Kudrick, who we've used on our first project, Two or Better, did proofreading after Kevin finished his piece. We also had a group of 4 women from the Christian Women Affiliate. It's an organization of many bloggers and book reviewers and authors, headed by Heather Randall, who gave this what they call an unbound review. So they basically acted as kind of beta readers on steroids, maybe. They read through the book and made specific comments. So we had a sense of, okay, we had editorial feedback, but here's how some other people just reading this book as it's been now edited and cleaned up. Here's how they see it. So we incorporated their feedback, and it was excellent feedback, into the book before we push it back to John David for the proofread.
The pictures, oh my goodness. How was you able to do that bike riding and to keep all those pictures? They're phenomenal.
That's one of the aspects of a bicycle tour. It's a phenomenal way to see the country. You're traveling at a slower rate of speed, and at times when you're taking a break, or when you see a nice scene come up, we have the advantage of having 2 of us, so we can always have a rider in a shot. And so we would trade off shooting different scenes. Some of them are just scenery, but most of them are with us in the shot. And yeah, we're kind of blown away by what we ended up with. Just little point and shoot cameras. It's another blessing of the experience.
Just a beautiful package. It's a beautiful gifts too.
Thank you for your.
I can see people reading that on planes, while they're traveling, because you're traveling and they're traveling. I mean, it's just an amazing book. Very impressed with that book.
Thank you. It's devotional is really, it has the feel of a devotional, but it's not like your typical devotional, because it has this travel log element to it. It's a little bit, the lessons are a little lengthier than you might find in your typical daily devotional, but it does have the feel of that. So it's got a lot of different elements to it. It's got the dual narrative, both of the female and male perspective. It's got the hope coaching kind of angle on things. It's got scripture tied to each lesson. There are reflection questions at the end of each lesson, so that the reader can take that lesson that we experienced and figure out, how does this apply in my life? So that the reflection questions turn back to the reader to ask them questions about what they just read.
And you both go together, because it looked like you do speaking engagements and coaching and different things like that. We
do some. We're certainly available to do that, but we're on call. Let's put it that way.
I mean, you go all over the country, or is it just where you live?
No, it's been very limited, actually. We don't do as much as we could be doing, I would say, but we've done some things in different places. But it's just nice to be able to share with people what God has done in your life. And it needs to be about them, not us. And it's kind of hard. I mean, these books have a lot of us in it. So it was really a kind of a balancing act of they don't know us from Adam, but this is what we experience, but we want this to help you. So.
But they really do get to know you guys, and they also experience God's presence also.
That would be our hope.
It's excellent. So if people wanted to purchase, because you have 4 other books, or is it 4 altogether?
Debbie and I have co-authored 4. We have 2 print books. 2 Are Better is a testimonial of how God brought us together, and our first bicycle tour after that. So that's in print and ebook. After we came back from our first trip, we wrote a small ebook called Bicycle Touring How-To, What We Learned. And that basically gives kind of nuts and bolts to people who have never done a bicycle tour. Here's how we went about doing it. If you want to do the same thing, here's how you would do it. So that's kind of a how-to type little ebook. And then Wheels of Wisdom came out in 2016, and contemporaneous with that, we actually had 60 lessons. And one of our editors recommended paring it down. So we took 8 of the lessons out of there, and they weren't the worst 8. They were the 8 that might have had some overlap or maybe didn't have the right fit. So they're good lessons, but they're set aside in kind of like a teaser ebook called Metaphors in Motion, Wisdom from the Open Road. So that's the 4th book. That's an ebook. And then I've written a book called Hedging Commodity Price Risk, A Small Business Perspective. So that's kind of out in another land. That's a niche business ebook, tapping in what I did in my former life.
So people wanted to purchase your books or even contact you and Debbie. How do they go about doing that?
They can find our books about anywhere. You'll certainly see them on Amazon. You can find them at our website, which is www.openroadpress.com. Our books are distributed by Baker and Taylor Publisher Services. So any bookstore in I'd say the world, can get a hold of it through either the distributor or pull it right through Ingram. So yeah, plenty of availability on these.
So are y'all planning on writing any more books?
You know, that's a great question, one I've been asking myself for quite some time. Marketing books is very challenging.
Trust me, I know.
Yeah, and it's you really have to look at the exercise and the goals you have very philosophically.
That's
it really
true.
has to be, that God can get this book into the right person's hands, because you may not be selling a lot of books. But that brings about some discouragement to create additional content because the marketing has been so challenging with these. But I've looked at, actually written a fictional account. You remember the story we talked about, Hell's Canyon?
Yes.
we were wondering what happened to this guy when he came out of Hell's Canyon. I've written a fictional account that answers that question.
I think that's a great idea.
So that was my
Wow.
first foray into fiction. It's actually entered into a contest, so I can't really give any specifics about that, but
awesome.
It was a way for me to test my appetite and or skill with fiction, and hey, we'll see what it brings. But I'm kind of thinking about some fictional material now.
Tim, you are on the Truth Will Set You Free show. Give us a truth to remember you by.
God loves you and has a plan for your life.
Amen. I really appreciate your time.
Thank you so much. I really enjoyed it.
Take care.
You too.
Bye-bye.
Bye.